When you walk into a library, you do so with a particular set of expectations. Expectations that are very different from those you might have when you sit at home, relax and pick up a novel. We imagine that a book, most often the work of a single author, will be absolutely consistent with itself. One voice, one message. But when we approach a library, we do so with a completely different mindset. As you wander around the aisles of any library, exploring the books on its shelves, you expect to encounter an array of different styles alongside endless complementary or contrasting opinions. Although we expect the range of authors represented in any particular section of the library, for instance, biology or engineering, to have huge amounts in common and to agree around the basics of their discipline, we also expect that there be variations in views, opinions, ideas, and attitudes. All of this we consider is absolutely natural and normal. It's what we expect. After all, it's a library, and the status and the reputation of any and every library in the world is built on the breadth rather than the narrowness of what it offers. As I've explained on many occasions now, the Bible is a library, not a book. And that means that besides any of the other implications of this that we've explored over the last few weeks, once you recognise this, the problem of all those little contradictions and messages that don't quite agree with one another simply evaporate. Our problem is, of course, that though the Bible is a library, it still looks like a book, and that's confusing. But it wasn't always the case. When I was a kid, I was taught a song about the books of the Bible so that I could remember their names and the order in which they appear. But here's the question. In which order did the books of the Bible come for St. Augustine in the 5th century or for Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century? The answer is actually very simple, and it's this. Whichever order Augustine or Thomas put them back on the shelves of their library at the end of the day before. Before the printing press, each scroll or book was handwritten, huge, expensive, and separate. And one more thing. Before the printing press, you might have had copies of some of what we now regard as the books of the canon of the Bible, but not some of the others. So another question. Why did Martin Luther, the famous father of the Protestant Reformation, feel so free to argue that the books of Hebrews, James, Jude and Revelation should be dropped from the New Testament altogether, simply because he perceived them to go against some of the views that he was trying to promote? Can you imagine a Christian leader today taking that kind of stance? But once again, however strange all this seems to us, the reason is actually very simple. Until after the invention of the printing press, although there was widespread agreement over most of the books that were worthy of joining the library of the Bible, nonetheless, full dogmatic articulations of its complete canon were not made by Roman Catholicism until 1546, only finally drifted into by the various wings of Protestantism as the century progressed, and only finalised by Greek Orthodoxy in 1672. Now, although from the 4th century there does seem to have existed a general but unwritten uniformity in the West, at least concerning the 27 books of the New Testament, which for the most part had tended to spread to the Eastern Church by the 5th century, we should remember that, as I've just said, as late as the 16th century, Martin Luther still felt able to challenge all of this. So what can we learn from this? 2 facts. Fact 1. Although it seems an odd thing to say, in the end, it was the invention of the printing press and particularly the mass production of cheap books that finally followed it that led eventually to the fixing of the canon of the Bible as we know it today. And fact 2, It's perhaps surprising that even then there was not, and there still isn't, any universal agreement around exactly which books do constitute the Bible. Different traditions include different books in different orders and sometimes divide or combine or include additional material into the books that they choose. In fact, Christian Bibles range from the 66 books of the Protestant Bible through to the 73 books of the Catholic Bible and all the way to the 81 books of the Ethiopian Orthodox Bible. So what constitutes the true Bible? Take your choice. All of which brings me to another of my principles for all those who want to deal with the Bible seriously. It is part of our responsibility to read and to debate the meaning of the text that we regard as Scripture within the Christian community humbly and honestly and openly. Because the library of the Bible consists of books which sometimes express different views, opinions, ideas and attitudes, as we've just said, reading the same text, the church and individuals within it will sometimes come to conflicting understandings of what it means to live as God's people in a particular location or cultural setting or time. Honouring all Scripture as God-breathed and useful for teaching, rebuking, correcting and training, as 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16 calls us to do, should therefore never lead us to insisting on uniformity or unanimity in understanding it. We will not always agree. We will see things differently. But when we disagree, it's clear that our Christ-given responsibility is always to continue to extend grace to one another and keep talking. Why? Because in the end, if the Bible teaches us anything, it's that each one of us is loved by God, not because of how right we are, but because God graciously and mercifully accepts us, sometimes despite the positions we adopt. So perhaps a sermon should be regarded as great, not because everyone in the congregation agrees with the preacher and loves their illustrations, but because at the end of the service, those present just can't wait to talk about it, to discuss it, to debate it together, because the text around which it was built has captured their imagination and fired their curiosity. What do you think?